Hi, my name's Cecilia Poullain, and welcome to this episode of Brave New Women. All around the world, there are amazing, ordinary women doing extraordinary things. Brave New Women is about giving those women a platform and a voice, and it's about changing the way that women are perceived. And it's a way of inspiring all of us to do the things that we've always wanted to do. Today, I'm so pleased to be talking to Corinne Weber. And Corinne is a film producer and creative director, and she has her own company, which is called Carpe Omnia Productions. She grew up in Berkeley, I'll pronounce that correctly. And I mentioned what she studied because it really gives an idea of what came afterwards. So she studied Spanish language and literature in Barcelona. And then she studied communications, Spanish and world arts and culture in California. After she left university, she worked as a film producer all around the world. So on films including Babel, 21 Grams, The Battle for Rio, Time Doesn't Stand Still, On This Day in 1948, and The Americana Project. She moved to France in 2008 and learnt French in an amazing 4 years. And not only did she learn French, but she then did a TED Talk in French, which I think is incredibly courageous. So welcome, Corinne.
Thank you so much for having me.
Corinne, let's start with the move to France. When did you know you were going to move to France?
Well, that's a funny story. I didn't really know I was going to move until I moved. I had been in New York at the time. I was working with Sam Mendes on his latest film at the time, which was Away We Go. And the film ended, and I had been for the last 10 years working constantly in LA and New York, and I needed a break. And so a girlfriend of mine who I had lived with in New York, who was from France, had moved back to Paris, and I decided to go visit her. And at the time, it was a joke because it was always a choice. I was either going to do yoga on the beaches in Mexico, or I was going to go to New York, to Paris, and visit my girlfriend. And so I went, and I stayed for a month. And one afternoon at a cafe, I ended up locking eyes with a Frenchman and fell in love and stayed. So that's now been 13 years.
Wow.
Unexpected completely, but unexpected. But I think that's kind of how beauty of life as it unfolds, these kind of unexpected things present themselves that you don't plan for. So, yeah.
And how has it been living in France for 13 years?
It's been really amazing. It's been life-changing. It's I had to learn French, as you say. I don't know if it happened quickly, but I was definitely determined. I spoke Spanish, which I think helped, but learning French was something that I just knew I felt that I needed to do. I was really motivated to do it. And I think when you learn language, you kind of learn a different part of yourself. And so that I find is really a beautiful part in learning the language. But learned the language, had to learn how to kind of produce in France because it's a different way of producing. But I've found the experience of living in another culture, how do I say, it forces you to kind of face your fears and become braver than you thought you could be in a way. You need to kind of be vulnerable and, know that you're going to make mistakes and that people will maybe laugh at you or not, or help you, or, it just kind of puts you in this very kind of vulnerable position. And I think that in the end made me at least stronger. And I just find the country amazing and beautiful. I've had the opportunity to travel quite a bit. I've lived in Paris. I recently bought a place in Marseilles. So I've been spending the last year or so in the south, and just discovering the countryside and just the nature. It reminds me actually a lot of California, Northern California, where I grew up. So I've had an amazing experience here so far. And I do miss home. I have to say, I'm missing my people at the moment, but
yeah, with COVID, travel is difficult.
Yeah, I've always been a big traveler, so that has definitely been challenging, but trying to be patient and yeah.
Let's go way back. So when you came out of university, did you know at that stage that you were going to be a film producer?
I didn't. I studied communications. Actually, when I got to UCLA, I was accepted into the program in arts and architecture. It was called World Arts and Culture. And then I transitioned into communications. The melding of the two kind of seemed, for me, what was really important. My love for culture, my love for arts, and then how to kind of communicate that in the public realm. So I graduated and didn't know what I was going to do, actually. I thought about law school. I thought about architecture school, which didn't really have anything to do with art or culture, but somehow felt pulled to. And then a friend called me, and he was also in the film industry. He had just gotten accepted to USC. And he's like, there's this amazing job. You have to go interview for it. You speak Spanish. It's with this new Mexican director. He's amazing. His name's Alejandro González Iñárritu. And coincidentally, I had just seen Amores Perros, which was his first feature film, and loved it and felt very impacted by it. And when I learned that the interview was with him, I kind of was like, there's no way. This is like everybody in town is going to want this job. And anyway, so I went, faced my fear, first interview in the industry. And I don't know, there was this huge stack of resumes. And I was like, you know what, just go in, just be yourself. I remember sitting in the car and like talking to myself in the rearview mirror of like kind of pumping myself up. Anyway, and I went to the interview and ended up getting a call back for it. And I ended up, we were three at the end, and I ended up bringing a high school term paper that I had written about the Civil War in El Salvador in the 1980s that somehow I thought was going to kind of show my rebellious side and this kind of like fighter side. Anyway, so I brought him my term paper. I have no idea if he really read it, but and I ended up getting hired, and that's how I started in the film world. I was 21. I was really green, and yeah, it was an amazing first job. So that's kind of how I ended up in the film world.
What do you think it was about you that meant that it was you that got the job? Do you know?
You know, at the end of the day, I just really kind of committed to being myself. You know, those kinds of things you're so young that I don't think you can really make up too much, you know what I mean? Or try and reinvent yourself at that stage. I think I was really just trying to be who I was in that moment. And I think I was young, and I think that was, you know, in a way good, because I could, for good or bad, in a sense, be molded in a way. And I was a sponge, you know, I was anxious. I was interested in learning. I was very kind of curious, and yeah, and I wanted to be helpful. I kind of also have that kind of perfectionist side of me that is just always, you know, trying to do the best I can, and I'm sure that comes off in a good way when you're interviewing for something. And I learned just so much in that experience. It was life changing. I mean, it really did set the tone and the stage for what was to follow. So
what did you love about that job and about being in the film industry?
Well, I mean, particularly with Iñárritu, was that he was such and still is a force in the film world, and in his way of telling stories, and his passion and his dedication and his kind of the heart that he puts into it is captivating. And, you know, I think being able to have such access to both him and to all of the different department heads, you know, the different departments, for me, that was just amazing. You know, you're in this center. You know, I said this I remember my TED talk, that I felt like I was in the center of this wheel, and that you've got all these spokes going out to all these different directions, and people and information is flying back and forth, and you get this amazing access and this opportunity to explore all of these different domains and disciplines and realms, and talk to people with all these different experiences. And I think for me, that's what I really loved the most. I mean, the traveling and, Babel, for example, was a 9-month shoot. And we spent 5 months in Morocco, 2.5 months in Mexico, and 2-ish months in Japan. And that, again, it's just, again, it was all coming together, right? All the, traveling the world, all of these different cultures, all of these different languages, and all these amazing people. It was just kind of everything in a way that I had wanted from an anthropological point of view of getting to learn. And then, and just feeling inspired and, and seeing it kind of all come together. I mean, it's really quite incredible when you get to see it happen.
Mm. Which have been the films that have touched you the most or changed you the most?
I'd probably say Babel in a way, because it was kind of the biggest production in a way. I think in doing these kind of, I spent my 20s working with Alejandro, with Sam Mendes, with these very big A-list directors doing these incredibly large production style films. And, it inspired me. I grew this I was appreciative of this process, but it also inspired me to want to produce myself and to invest in projects that I really felt passionate about, and that stories that I wanted to tell or that I wanted to help people tell. And, when that transition happens in a way, it's really interesting because you don't necessarily, obviously don't have the same budgets. You don't have the same size teams. It's much smaller. Everybody's kind of helping out in different ways. So I think, there's been my first documentary project that I produced was called Americana, that I did in 2009 with an amazing director, Topaz Adizes. And that was, again, we were in, 10 different countries around the world, exploring American perspective at a time, 2008, 2009. It was kind of a very interesting time in the world. So those two, I think, in terms of kind of the big side and then the kind of passion portion, impetus, I think those are two that come to mind. I mean, there's been so many along the way, and smaller projects that I just, I really believed in and felt like they deserved to be told. So, but so many different, ranging from so many different places. It's really interesting looking back, kind of the decisions I made and choices, and what led me to say yes or no, or yeah. So.
Just tell me, I'd like to come back to what led you to say yes or no, but just tell me a little bit more about Americana. When you said it's about American perspectives, what was that? What was
it started following two 18-year-olds in California, in the Southern California, in Bullhead City, who were about to go off to war. And so we traveled to countries all around the world and kind of explored what American identity was, and kind of reputation of Americans in the world. And over not only present day, but also looking back. We traveled to Hiroshima in Japan, Albania. It was just kind of these little, how do I want to say, these little like fragments of society that we were kind of dissecting in a way. And from a cultural perspective, culturally, anthropologically speaking, it was just so interesting to get these kind of unique perspectives that, unless you ask the question, you don't have the answer. So,
were you surprised? Were you surprised by the answers you got?
I think, yeah. In some cases, definitely. And I think as an American, having now lived abroad for so many years as well, there's just this very interesting thing about how you identify yourself. How, are you American? Am I this, kind of global citizen? Am I proud of my country, especially over these last few years? I'm not proud of my country. and that changes, that shifts. I mean, I remember being 18 and traveling in Europe in college, and people putting like Canadian patches on their backpacks instead of US patches because they didn't want to be known as Americans. And that was just this really interesting thing. And this dialogue that I think has been existing in my life since I can remember about being an American in a foreign place. As well for you, as Australian being in France, it's like this kind of, who are we really? Is it where we were born? Is it what country, that we come from? Is it where we live? And I think that's something that I feel really fortunate in my life to have gotten to experience. It's this ability to kind of not change, but to tap into different parts of yourself and to have people ask you these hard questions in a way, because it forces you to kind of take stock of where you're at and where you've been and where you're going, and to constantly be evolving in a way, and I think that that's important in the world we're living in, is to constantly be evolving and learning. If you stop learning, it's like, yeah.
Now, I wonder what it would be like if every country in the world had its Americana project. And so, for example, in France, people would understand, well, this is how people see France. In Australia, this is how people see Australia.
Yeah, it's true. That Topaz, the same director, did a really interesting project called The And, where he would take two people, he had various versions of it, but two people that would sit across from one another and ask each other questions. That's a great project to check out. And the questions and the discussions and the reactions, he's really into immersive storytelling. And just, there's some that are just, heartbreaking and awe-inspiring, because you get these responses that, unless you ask the question, you won't get. And so I think that sometimes you kind of have to not force it, but you have to be brave to ask those questions, and to kind of be ready for the answers, and to ultimately respond with your heart, and to be honest and respectful. But yeah, I agree. That would be an interesting project to do. Add it to my list.
What have been some of the main messages that you have wanted to put out there via film? A double question, really. What are the messages, and why have you thought that film has been the most appropriate way to get those messages out there?
That's a good question. I think that film, ultimately what films are stories that are being told in a visual format, that are trying to convey a message, either of somebody's experience, somebody's point of view, somebody's upbringing, somebody's trials and tribulations. And I think film for me is like it's this vehicle that you're able to just construct these worlds that exist in and of themselves, and they stand on their own. And so it provides this very interesting medium to convey message, and to not always shift perspective, but when you see a powerful film, it'll stay with you and it sticks with you, and it forces, you're forced then to ask yourself questions, maybe because it triggers something in you. And I think that film provides this opportunity to feel emotion, and to communicate in a very, I'm looking for the word, it's like it touches all of your senses in a way. It touches your eyes because you're seeing these images. It touches your ears because the music and the sound design and the actors' voices, and or in a documentary setting, real people's voices. It touches kind of your heartstrings. It touches your mind, and I like that it's all sensory, and it's, when it really works, when everything comes together, it can change you. And I think that that's really powerful when you think about power of communication in general. So,
and when you look back, are there particular themes that you have been pursuing in your work?
In terms of general messaging or general, over the years, I mean, I think my interest has always been in, it's kind of hard to kind of lump it all together in a way, but I think, you know, over the years, I grew up in Berkeley, California. I grew up, surrounded by different cultures. I grew up in a very environmentally um, uh, friendly place where, growing up, we recycled. We were. I was always kind of surrounded by that, and I think as I've gotten older, projects have come to me that I've always tried to find these ways of melding different disciplines and different worlds and figuring out ways to communicate. We'll maybe talk about it at some point, but I always felt, for example, that there was a problem with data, scientific data, in the sense that you want to learn about something, you want to learn about something happening in the environment, and so a scientist will write this paper, but the data is so dense, and if you don't have enough of the background to really digest it, it doesn't really touch you. But through art, in a way, you can transmit and translate that data via an artist, and somehow the message becomes more accessible, and it sticks with you. It comes back to that kind of emotional impact that image can have. And so I think that I've tried to align myself with projects that I feel passionate about, that I believe in, because as anybody who's in the film world knows, that you spend a lot of time from start to finish on a project. So it's got to be something that you believe in, that you love, that you want to invest your time in. So yeah, I think I've always tried to do projects that I believe in, that kind of that guide me somehow, or that I feel are going to kind of continue to educate me on my journey and bring me to the next one. And, they're kind of all one-offs, I like to think, in a way. As I get older, I like to think that. I don't know if I thought that when I was young. But.
The other thing that strikes me about the films that you've talked about is that a lot of them seem to be about something that will multicultural or different perspectives across the world, and the fact that that we are all part of a single world. That seems to be the theme that I'm hearing that's coming out very strongly.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think that I like that kind of discovery. I remember taking this anthropology class in college, and just from an anthropological point of view, I think that we're here on this planet to learn about other people and to thus learn about ourselves. And so, indigenous culture, I did it's funny, I've just kind of reconnected with this amazing woman who she's a conservationist. And so she had helped put together this trip in Peru a few years back. It was probably 10 years ago now, but we spent 10 days on the Amazon River looking at conservation, looking at gold mining, looking at like all of these issues affecting the Peruvian rainforest. And it was just, I felt honored. I felt blessed. I felt like, what a privilege to be in this place, to be learning, to be trying to gather information, to then turn into something to share with the world. What an honor, And I think, I mean, that's what I really love. I can't always do those kinds of projects because, they don't always come to fruition. But that's kind of my guiding force in a way. Yeah.
And can you tell me about MELD? Like a whole different medium.
A whole different medium. So when around the same time I moved to France, I had started producing on my own, and I started receiving a lot of projects that were centered around climate change. Somehow I was just attracting them. And again, this is kind of where the disconnect between the facts and how facts are perceived came into play. And so I came up with this idea to bring together scientists and artists and kind of put them into a speed dating relationship in a way, and engage in these kind of long form dialogues about various issues embedded in climate change and social injustice. But I knew it was very daunting as kind of a concept. And so I brought on this amazing woman. Her name's Yvonne Sounouf. And at the time she was in Greece. Also kind of multicultural girl from around the world. And I thought that was a unique find. And we, over Skype, spent, 6 months to a year going back and forth over Skype and exchanging and sharing ideas. And, it was really, how do we see the world, and what's our kind of our purpose? What's our role on this planet? And so we, created this, at the time was a nonprofit, and launched various projects. One of our main ones was called Project Nero, which is Project Water in Greek. And in Athens, there's a central river called the Kifissos River that spans north to south through the center of the city, and historically was just a place of where people would meet, where people would come together. And in 2004, the Olympic Games came to Athens, and they needed a big thoroughfare to transport people, and so they decided to build a highway over this river, and thus concrete walls along the side of the river. And anyway, so it basically destroyed this river. So in the north, they started dumping and polluting. When immigration started coming to Athens, all the immigrants would set up right alongside the river. But it meant that they didn't have access to a lot of what they needed. The temperature of the city went up because there was no air circulating. So we joined forces with a German artist whose name is Alexander Schellow, and he works with memory reconstruction. And so he will go and kind of experience a place and a people, and doesn't take notes. He doesn't take photos. He just experiences it. And then 3 months later, he'll sit down and he will draw by hand what he saw, what he experienced. And so we created a 20-minute long animation piece that's centered on this river. And it's in different chapters, and it kind of explores the different stories that were taking place alongside this river. And the experience alone was just incredible because, the access we had, we probably brought on and spoke with over 50, thinkers, journalists, scholars. And from a selfish perspective, it's like, what better job than to just be able to learn from all these people and soak up all this information and then transmit it, So that was a big one. We did another photo project. A big artist in France, his name is JR. He won the TED Inside Out project back in 2010 or 11. And so we were really inspired by it, and we decided to do 2 projects. The first one was called Eyes of Truth, and it looked at privileged and underprivileged children and photographed them side by side. And the idea was who, and did it matter? And touched on a lot of them, a lot of the unprivileged children, if we want to say that, even though it's not the case necessarily. We're often immigrants. And in Greece, in around 2011, it was, immigration was incredible in terms of who was coming from where. And it was just a thoroughfare of immigrants and refugees coming in. So we did that project, and other Inside Out projects were taking place all around the same time. And so we decided to unite forces with a project in Juarez at the border between Mexico and the United States. And we created a project called Be the Change. And we brought on, God, now I don't even remember. I think we had about 26 cities in 20 different countries around the world. And so we all took photographs, and we each had 250 photographs. And then we sent them to be printed, and then we all exchanged them, and then we all posted them the same day. And again, it's those, all of these cultures kind of intersecting, and the dialogue that came about. And So Meld has, become a bit silent the last few years because Yvonne and I have had some other projects that have come up, but it's such an amazing platform to unite people from different worlds. We have a climate change opera with, a Australian artist. I don't know if you know him. His name is Sean Gladwell, who's paired. He's, I think, in his mid-40s, and he's paired with Cynthia Rosenvig, who's a scientist at NASA with the Goddard Space Study Institute, and she's one of the forefront thinkers in climate change. And so we've paired these two, and they've been in dialogue now for many years. And so it's an ongoing project. It's probably will never end in a way, but we've done some really interesting and unique projects, and that I'm really proud of, that weren't financially motivated, and so that also has been important, to learn that not everything is built on money, so.
And when you say that all these photos were posted, where were they posted on the internet? Or
the concept for JR, he does, I don't know if you're familiar with his work, but he does big format black and white photo projects and posts them outdoor on, outdoor walls and buildings and so forth. So every country found spaces to be able to post with just kind of this white, water flower mixture. I think they were about 90 by 180 centimeter size. So they were quite large. But we had to kind of make partnerships with the city and but just the people that came together was just so inspiring, right? It was like all these people from these different worlds that would have never had an opportunity to meet, but we're able to come together through the power of art and the public space. And it's just inspiring when that happens, and it makes you feel good. I don't know, you're guided by something other than a paycheck, which I think is something in my last, decade that I've learned, because I've transitioned. I mean, I still produce film, but in a different way. And so it's, I'm now into my next decade, so I don't know what'll come, but I think, it's just been so interesting, and I've loved learning. At the end of the day, I've learned a lot. So
what I understand about Meld is that it's about making connections between people all around the world that would never have otherwise met each other.
Yeah, and creating projects that help to communicate issues that are maybe hard to not read about, but hard to digest otherwise. I think seeing something, like I said, the goal with, for example, Project Nero was at the time, it was so hard because we were trying to get this project off the ground during what was the biggest financial crisis in Greece. But the idea was to post these animations, to project them in spaces that you could only see by being on the metro, and the metro would traverse the river. And so it was like the only way you could see these projections was to get on the metro and see the river, to remind yourself that the river exists, and to bring awareness back to the river, and to remind the people of what was and what should be again. And I think we have always big dreams and goals about what art projects can bring, and sometimes they happen and sometimes they don't, but just the act of doing it is already amazing. And so I don't look at it as a success or failure. I just look at the action. It's not about the destination, it's about the journey. A bit cliche, but I really believe that. So.
And what are your current projects?
My current projects, I over the last couple of years, I created my own company here in France, Carpe Omnia, which means seize everything, and I've created it with my husband, my partner here, who's also in the industry. And for us, it was really to be able to invest in projects that we believe in. So I've been working with a young director who I love. His name is Thibaut Jouvon, who we're working on a project, a kind of visual haiku journey, let's say. We're creating a series of 3 films that are, it's called Du Soleil à la Lune. And the idea is to really transmit kind of what's happening in the world in terms of the environment, the landscape, how nature, how the elements kind of work within, among themselves. So we traveled to Iceland. We spent 5 days in Iceland. We spent 5 days Ile de Ré, which is on the western coast of France, and doing this kind of amazing little atelier on the beaches of these places with a DP, Martin de Chevenex, and Pauline Chauff, who's an amazing SFX designer. And the four of us, we were just like kids, kind of creating these environments out of thin air. And so that's a project we've been developing, and we're looking to do the third phase soon, the third and fourth phases. Otherwise, we have a documentary project called Earthx, which follows 3 extreme sport athletes, and kind of in parallel what they're doing for the environment, in terms of both their own life choices about what they're eating, to how they are taking care of the beaches, to how they transport themselves from one rock to the next, by trying to not fly and, bike when they can and so forth. Anyway, so that's a project we have going. And then a bunch of other kind of long format fiction projects that we're developing and writing. And yeah.
They sound absolutely amazing. I mean,
thank you.
What a great job to have in such a creative space, and to be bringing in all parts of you, and be meeting all these incredible people. It just sounds amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been, it hasn't always been easy. There's definitely times, I think, when you decide to work for yourself, that it's, that at the end of the day, it's you who kind of have to cheerlead for yourself. And so that's something that I constantly remind myself of, and always looking for the different ways to be inspired. And nature, I think, has been key in that regard for me, of just reminding myself of where we are and what we need to be doing for ourselves and for future generations. And so that's been a guiding force. And I feel very privileged, and obviously I'm looking forward to what comes next. So,
Corinne, what's the bravest thing you've ever done?
Bravest thing. I don't know. I mean, you brought up my TED Talk. I think that was probably, I don't consider myself, I've gotten better over the years in terms of public speaking. But I think that was probably one of my biggest. I had already done a TED Talk in Athens, but then and that was in English. But then I was asked to do one in Alsace, in the northeastern part of France, in French. And it was in 2012, I believe. I'd been in France for 4 years on and off at that point. Anyway, and so it was going to be in front of 800 people, and I had to speak for 20 minutes in French about my life. And I remember being so stressed. It was in this big, cinema complex too. It was 15 different rooms. It was cold. It was in November, I think. And I just remember my feet being really cold. And I was second to last or something. So I had to wait the whole day. And and I remember getting up on stage, and I was like, well, either you got to go for it or you don't, but go for it. And so I went for it, and I'm sure I made mistakes. And anyone who's seen that TED Talk, looking back, it was one of those things that it was definitely, got to face my fears, and what's the worst that's going to happen, and if you don't do it, then you'll always have regret. So might as well try. So I did, but I think that's one of them. Just looking back recently, that's facing fear and feeling brave and feeling really proud at the end, good job. it was hard, but good job.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, having learned French myself, I know how long it takes just to master a language. So,
and it's such an intimidating language, right? It's like, when you start to really speak and understand and listen, the historical, cultural references and the Lago, everything that like is built into the language, it's so deep and it's so layered, and it's, you talk to French people and you feel like they're still learning, let alone being a foreigner trying to learn the language. So, and you speak beautifully as well. So I'm in awe as well of people, who actually try, because I know a lot of people who come here and they don't even try. So,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And another question is, what has it been meant to you in your career to be a woman? Has it been a positive or a negative? Have there been hard things?
There's definitely, definitely there have been hard things. I think having started so young as well, I was,
especially in the film industry.
Yeah. And I think it was easy to kind of mold me and manipulate at the same time. And so I think looking back, I mean, this is one of the big things, and it's linked to the TED Talk in a way, because it's like, I had difficulty finding my voice, I think, in my 20s. As a woman, I think I consciously or subconsciously didn't learn how to really express myself because I was afraid of consequences. And I think just in the film industry in general, I mean, it's so male oriented, and having worked with amazing but male directors, I actually had an opportunity over my career, but in particular, I've had the opportunity to work with some amazing female producers. Anne Rourke is one of them. And most recently, I worked with Liza Chase and Mary Jo Winkler, who are, some of the most amazing female producers in the world. And getting to work along females in that world is just, I don't like to make differentiations between men and women, but I think in this industry, I think being a woman, it's like you have to find your voice, because if you don't, I mean, it's true in any domain, I think, but especially in the film world, I think it's, again, you have nothing to lose. So that's something I've over the years become much better at, and expressing myself and speaking up for myself, and trusting myself. I think, I think it ultimately comes from a lack of confidence, ultimately, when we don't step up and when we don't ask those questions. So, I think as we get older, I think we believe in ourselves more. And so, being a woman, I think in general, I think in the world, we have to listen to ourselves more deep down, and really trust ourselves. So that's something I think that I've learned, and I'm learning constantly, So.
Well, Corinne, I was going to ask the last question, which is, what is your message for people who are listening? But I think you've probably just given it.
Yeah, I mean, I think stay curious. I think I've launched a lot of ideas and projects in my career so far, and some of them have really been successful and others haven't. And I think we learn from everything we do. And for me, I'm so curious about the world and about people and about, I think we're given everything that's gone on this last year. It's like we've had this kind of opportunity to reset and to think about how we live our own lives, and kind of quality of life and balance in life and breathing, and kind of coming back to really the basics of, how do we want to exist in this world? How do we want to interact with other people? What do we want our legacy to be? What do we want our grandchildren, our nieces and nephews, future generations? We have this opportunity to change things for the better. And I think not only on a personal, nature, but also professionally, I really hope that the projects that I do help in that regard, and I think just trust your heart and stay curious. Those are my words.
Well, thank you, Corinne. It's been just a delight for me to be able to speak to you and to hear about your projects and to hear about how you're using your creativity to try and actually change things in the world. And I think the more people there are like you, the better the world would be. So thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for creating this space. And I've listened to some of the other interviews you've done, and they've all been just so inspiring. And I love that you've created this space to share these stories, and makes me want to be able to connect with all of these women. So maybe there'll be an opportunity in the future to do that.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Brave New Women. Certain podcast sites such as Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, or Podchaser let you leave a rating and a review. The more ratings and reviews we get, the more people will listen and the more these women's stories will be shared. So I'd really appreciate it if you could. Thanks for listening.